Her smile froze my blood. Right there, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, she leaned toward me and whispered, "The perfect gift would be your death." I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet, yet the applause from the guests rolled on, oblivious. The violins played, the candles flickered, and I stood frozen, a mother turned into an enemy at her daughter's altar. I wanted to scream, but my throat sealed shut. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone would hear it over the priest's voice. I forced my lips into something like a smile, terrified that if I let my face slip, the room would devour me alive. But her eyes never softened. They glinted like blades. If you want to know what came after this moment, subscribe right now, because the truth of what unfolded next will twist your stomach the way hers twisted mine. I stared at the bouquet in her trembling hands. White roses, delicate as snow. They looked so pure, but they belonged to the same mouth that had just cursed me. My legs buckled slightly, and I gripped the pew in front of me, pretending it was just emotion, not despair, making me weak. The guests clapped when the priest pronounced them husband and wife. My daughter leaned into her groom, but her eyes never left me. She held the kiss longer than necessary, as if mocking me with her new life, her new power. I felt small, erased, yet fully exposed under that gaze. My sister touched my arm gently, whispering, "Are you all right?" I nodded, forcing a smile, though my cheeks burned. Inside, I was a storm. My daughter's words kept repeating, hammering, like nails into wood. The perfect gift would be your death. I remembered the nights I worked overtime. My hands cracked from cleaning houses, my back bent from carrying weight. I remembered the mornings I packed her lunch, even when we barely had food for two. And now, the child I raised, the child I fed, stood there, wishing me gone. The photographer snapped pictures, asking us all to gather around. My daughter pulled her new husband close, giggling sweetly for the camera. But when my turn came, when I stepped beside her, she leaned close again, just enough for me to hear, "Don't ruin my pictures with that pathetic face." My lips trembled, but I held them shut. I told myself, endure, just endure. I wanted to believe it was nerves, stress, anything but true cruelty. But the venom in her eyes told me otherwise. This wasn't a slip, it was intent. When the champagne glasses clinked, she raised hers high. "To new beginnings," she said, her smile sharp, "and to letting go of old burdens." A murmur of laughter rippled through the room, and I knew every eye turned briefly toward me. I swallowed the bitterness like broken glass. Her groom looked uncomfortable, shifting beside her, but said nothing. His silence stung almost as much as her words. He had become her shield, or maybe her accomplice. I couldn't tell yet. But the way his hand pressed on her waist made it clear. She belonged to him now, not me. I excused myself to the restroom, splashing cold water on my face. The mirror showed a woman pale, trembling, eyes red at the edges. I didn't recognize her. She looked like someone already buried. I pressed my palms against the sink, whispering to myself, "Stay calm. You can't fall apart here." The sound of laughter echoed from the hall. Their joy felt like knives, each chuckle carving away at me. I dabbed my face dry and straightened my dress, trying to summon dignity, though inside everything was collapsing. When I returned, the cake was being cut. My daughter smiled wide, the perfect bride, but I saw her glance at me before feeding her groom a piece. Her lips curled just slightly, a private smirk, as if reminding me, "You are no longer needed." I sat back in my chair, staring at the glass of champagne in front of me. The bubbles rose quickly, popping at the surface, disappearing in seconds. Just like me. I lifted it, swallowed, and tasted nothing but bitterness. The music swelled, couples took the floor, and I felt invisible. My own child never once invited me to dance. Instead, she twirled across the room with her friends, each spin pulling her further away from me. A thought slithered into my mind, dark and unbearable. Maybe she truly wanted me gone. Maybe she wouldn't miss me if I vanished tomorrow. Maybe she would celebrate it. The idea sank its claws deep, and I couldn't shake it off. Someone tapped my shoulder. The caterer, asking about the bill. I blinked, confused, until he explained, Your daughter said you'd handle the payments. My blood ran cold. I realized then she had already shifted her burdens onto me, even as she cut me out of her life. I forced a nod, pretending everything was fine. But my chest tightened. My savings were already stretched thin, drained by years of sacrifices. And now, even at her wedding, I was reduced to nothing more than her wallet. Her voice rose again from across the hall, laughter mingled with arrogance. Don't worry. My mom loves paying for everything. That's her role. My face burned. Guests chuckled politely, but their eyes darted toward me, pitying, embarrassed. I wanted the ground to open and swallow me whole. Every humiliation stacked higher, pressing me down. Yet she stood there, glowing, adored, while I was left in the shadows. And then she picked something up from the table. My breath caught when I saw it gleam in her hand. My keys. My house keys. She dangled them like a trophy, whispering to her groom with a smile that chilled my bones. I froze. My world tilted. How had she even gotten them? Before I could move, she tucked the keys into her clutch, and her laughter rose louder, brighter, almost triumphant. That was the moment I knew. She was planning something far worse than words. I couldn't sleep that night. Her words at the altar still echoed inside my skull, rattling louder than any thunder could. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering every moment that had led us here, every sacrifice, every broken dream of mine that had been traded for hers. I thought of the day I sold my old blue car, the one my husband and I had shared when we first married. I had cried while handing over the keys, but I told myself it was worth it, because the money would help pay her tuition. I remembered pawning my wedding ring too, the thin band that still carried his warmth even after he was gone. The jeweler looked at me with pity, as if he knew how much it cost me to unclasp that piece of my heart. I walked home with the envelope of money pressed against my chest, whispering that one day she'd understand. One day she'd see what love meant. But she never looked back. To her, it was nothing but numbers deposited into her account, never the pieces of me that bled to keep her dreams alive. I used to work double shifts at the diner, smelling of grease and burned coffee every night. My hands cracked from scrubbing pans, my back screaming from carrying trays. Still, I smiled each payday, because I could pay another semester. I'd sit at the kitchen table, bills scattered everywhere, calculator buzzing, and I'd think, at least she won't have to live this life. At least she'll rise higher than I ever could. That belief was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. But with each step she climbed, I faded further into the background. She never asked how I was, never noticed the holes in my shoes, or the nights I went without dinner so she could eat better. And I told myself it was fine. A mother's role was to carry the burden silently. I convinced myself that love meant disappearing so she could shine. Now I see how dangerous that lie really was. When she got her first scholarship, she celebrated with her friends, not with me. I stayed home, baking her favorite cake, waiting for her to return. She came back late, tipsy, laughing, barely touched a slice before heading upstairs. I ate that cake alone in the dark kitchen, telling myself she was just young, that she'd appreciate me later. But later never came. Even when she graduated, I stood in the crowd waving, clapping until my palms stung. I shouted her name, but she didn't turn. She smiled for cameras, hugged professors, and posed with friends. Not once did she glance at me, the woman who had kept her alive through sweat and sacrifice. I kept smiling, though, forcing the tears back, because no one could know how invisible I truly was. Her father would have been proud, I thought. If he were alive, maybe she'd be softer. Maybe she'd understand. His absence weighed heavy on me, heavier than the bills or the aching loneliness. I carried his memory like a lantern, believing it lit her path too. But maybe she forgot him just as easily as she forgot me. Sometimes I would find her old toys in boxes in the attic, the ragged teddy bear she used to cling to, the coloring books filled with scribbles. I'd run my hand over them, remembering her little giggles, the way she once hugged me so tight my ribs hurt. Where had that child gone? At what point had she decided I was no longer her safe place, but her burden? I realized I had been erasing myself for years, convincing myself that being unseen was the proof of good motherhood. And yet, at her wedding, When she finally looked me in the eye, it wasn't with love or gratitude. It was with cruelty so sharp, it cut deeper than any blade. That was the reward for all I had given. The house I built became hers in her mind. The clothes on her back, the meals she ate, all of it had been pulled from my veins. And now, she treated me as nothing more than a ghost squatting in her life. I had given everything, yet somehow I owed her more. That realization burned me from the inside out. I thought back to the long winters when the heater broke, and I sat shivering while she slept under extra blankets. I told her I wasn't cold, that I liked the chill, though my bones ached with frost. I made up stories about loving simplicity, just so she wouldn't feel guilty. She never even asked. There was one Christmas when I couldn't afford gifts. I wrapped old books in paper, wrote notes in the margins, and gave them to her. She rolled her eyes, tossed them aside, muttered, "Why couldn't you just buy something normal?" I laughed it off, pretending I didn't care. But inside, it broke something that never fully healed. When she got her first real job, I thought things would change. I thought she'd remember me, maybe help me with groceries or fix the leaky roof. Instead, she used her salary on vacations, designer bags, and nights out. She posted photos with captions about independence, about how she built her life on her own. Each time I saw those words, it felt like a knife twisting. And yet, I kept waiting for the day she'd turn to me and say thank you, waiting for her to remember that behind her life was my sacrifice. The thank you never came. Instead, at her wedding, she gave me something else, a wish for my death, the sharpest kind of betrayal. I think what hurt the most wasn't just the cruelty. It was realizing how blind I had been, how I had clung to illusions. I had thought love would come back to me eventually, like a river flowing home. But it never did. I had built her world while mine crumbled, and she didn't even notice. That night, lying awake, I understood something dangerous was growing inside her. That smile at the altar wasn't new. It was just the mask finally slipping, and if I didn't protect myself, she would consume the last pieces of me without hesitation. The sound of her laughter from the wedding still rang in my ears, even in the silence of my room. My chest tightened. I thought of the keys she had taken, the way she held them like a prize. She wasn't just cutting me off emotionally. She was preparing to take everything tangible too. My home, my life, my dignity. I closed my eyes, trembling, and told myself this was only the beginning. What she had planned for me was darker than I wanted to believe, and soon she would show me just how far she was willing to go. She stood at the microphone and laughed my name like it was a joke, loud enough for everyone to hear, and then leaned in close and said, "Honestly, she's always been so embarrassing." My cheeks went hot, a bright shame that spread from my ears to my throat, and in that instant, the air around me felt thin and sharp. Subscribe if you want to see how I kept swallowing this poison for years. I promise, the next part will make you rethink who you trust. The band kept playing, the lights spun, and people smiled as if nothing had happened. Their smiles were like soft knives. I wanted to disappear then and there, to fold into myself and vanish beneath the tablecloth, but I remained sitting, smiling like a trained portrait, while my bones trembled. She mimed my clumsy gait to her friends, the little hop I make when the heel catches my dress, and they squealed with that cruel kind of delight that comes from feeling superior. I felt fingers, not physical ones, but social pressure, point at every tiny flaw I'd concealed for years. The faded hem on my dress, the cheap perfume, the way I laughed too loud at old jokes. My mouth tasted of metal. The room smelled of lilies and cheap cologne, an odd contrast that made my memories bright and aching. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing holes in her school blazers, the mornings I ironed collars with the patience of someone stitching together a future. And there she was, unraveling that future with every giggle, turning my stitches into spectacle. A cousin I hadn't seen in a decade came over and patted my hand with that pitying warmth that feels colder than a slap. He whispered, "She's different now, isn't she?" As if difference justified cruelty, as if success could excuse cruelty's sharp edges. I kept my eyes low and nodded, tasting the lump rising in my throat like swallowed bread. I caught a glimpse of my daughter's face, smooth, practiced, perfectly lit, and a small, precise cruelty played across her mouth. That look was like glass breaking. It cut through the years of, "I did this for you," until only shards remained. Later, at the head table, she whispered into her groom's ear something that made him smile, and then look at me with a new, uncomfortable curiosity. He raised his glass to me once, stiffly, emotion more obligation than warmth, and I realized he was learning the rules of her world. Exclude the past. Applaud the future. My sister tried to squeeze my hand under the table, but then withdrew it, unsure whether interference might make the scene worse. I smiled anyway, because I had practiced smiling through so much. It had become a reflex, a shield I could not lower. The photographer clicked, capturing my composed face for albums that would later be shown at birthdays and anniversaries, immortalizing my humiliation. At one point, she called for a toast, and, with exaggerated sweetness, recited all the things she owed to people who had helped her. She named donors, mentors, even a teacher who had once tutored her in calculus, and then paused dramatically before adding, "And, of course, my mother, who's always been generous." The ellipsis was a blade. Laughter rippled like waves and thundered in my chest. I felt as if I were being itemized in a ledger, contributions, credits, liabilities, and my name sat under an entry labeled expense. The room felt smaller, as if the walls leaned in to witness my accounting. She mocked the way I answered the phone when I called late at night, my small, anxious voice pleading about bills or leaks. She imitated my tremor and made it into a punchline. People chuckled, and the chuckle turned into a chorus that boxed me into a corner of the hall. I tried to recall the faces of all those who had helped me when I needed it most. Neighbors, old friends, but the memory pulled thin, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I thought about the nights I had paid for her violin lessons when my own hands ached from work. I thought about the cold pizza at 2 in the morning while studying for finals, and how I'd sit and watch her sleep with a fierce, exhausted love. That love felt absurd now, like a currency she had laundered into contempt. She made a joke about my fashion sense that landed with a cruel thud, and someone nearby snorted, loud enough to sound like applause. My sister's eyes filled with something awkwardly close to embarrassment, as if she too felt the heat and didn't want to be seen supporting the wrong side. I kept picturing the little apartment we'd shared when the rent was lower and our dreams were younger, the mug with a chip that we still used despite its imperfection. I had once believed that preserving traditions and small comforts would anchor us, that those details would create roots. Instead, each fondness had become proof, in her eyes, of my supposed obsolescence. The DJ played our old song, the one that used to make her dance in the kitchen with flour on her face, and for a moment I saw that child again, spinning like the world was only ours. Then she strode into the center, grabbed the microphone, and dedicated the song to new chapters, deliberately omitting the people who'd been chapters before. The crowd applauded this neat severance, the way people like tidy narratives, beginnings cleanly cut from messy pasts. Her feet beat time on the floor like a metronome marking the tempo of her independence. I realized then how she rewrote memories, trimming away the rough edges where my sacrifices lived. A waiter accidentally spilled a glass of red wine near my shoes. Someone gasped, but then she laughed and said, "It matches her dress, doesn't it?" As if color could cover the stain of what she'd done. The wine spread like a dark map across the carpet, and my mind drew maps too. Directions back to mistakes I'd made, choices I'd thought noble that now looked naive. I dabbed at the stain with a napkin, pretending the ritual would fix more than fabric. If only repairing fabric could repair hearts. If only wiping a stain could erase memory. Outside on the terrace, a breeze carried the faint scent of the city and the harsher aroma of cigarette smoke from a cluster of guests. I stepped out to breathe and found myself overhearing snippets of a conversation about trust funds and future plans. My daughter's name, tied to figures and spreadsheets, made my stomach drop. Numbers had always been foreign to me. I'd trusted banks and contracts to hold what I could not see. Now those numbers looked like knives aimed to detach me completely. The breeze felt like a verdict, cold, impersonal, final. She texted someone and laughed at the screen, the glow painting her face in an intimate, conspiratorial light that I didn't belong to. I moved closer, pretending to tie my shoe, and read, just for an instant, a phrase. "We take care of everything. She'll never know." The pulse in my temple thudded. A private message had slipped into the open like a warning. I told myself I'd misread it. I told myself bridges could be rebuilt. But the words lingered, a mustard seed of suspicion sprouting fast. I returned to my seat and found a small envelope tucked under my plate, its handwriting unfamiliar and precise. My name was on it, and my hand shook as I slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside was a note with a short, neat sentence. "Thanks for being useful." No signature. I stared at the paper until the words blurred, like someone had smudged ink over the last proof of my dignity. Around me, people chatted about honeymoon destinations. They planned beaches and hotels. I folded the note back to its place and placed the envelope on the table like a secret I couldn't afford to show. That night, as the lights dimmed and the dance slowed, a small, insidious truth settled. Humiliation had been the tool she used to dethrone me. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated campaign of erasure. My memories had become a gallery she refused to hang. I felt stripped of title and function, reduced to a footnote in a speech that celebrated her. I thought of the years I had given, and the sudden clarity hit like a frost. Gratitude had never been her currency. Power was. My phone buzzed with a text from the bank, an automated message about account activity I hadn't authorized. The timing was too neat to be coincidence. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom, palms damp, breath rapid. As I pushed the door open, my reflection caught me. Hollow-eyed, tight-jawed, and, beneath the surface, something else. A new hardness, a steely calculation I hadn't felt before. The humiliation had not only bruised me, it had changed me into someone who would no longer passively accept being erased. Back in the hall, she was standing beneath a glittering chandelier, surrounded by people who admired her like a trophy, and she lifted my keys from her clutch and dangled them between her fingers with a smirk. The gesture was trivial, except that it wasn't. It was a declaration. My throat closed. I reached for the keys in my mind, not with hands, but with history, with memory and claim. The room tilted, and the music swelled like a tide rising toward disaster. I realized then that humiliation was merely the beginning of her plan, and that the next move would be something darker, something that would force me to decide whether to stay and fight or to disappear completely. I saw the keys in her hand and felt like someone had thrown a stone through the window of my life. They flashed under the chandelier and became an accusation. The metal glinted and the room blurred. For a second I couldn't tell whether I was watching a wedding or a funeral. If you want to know why a small ring of metal can start a war, subscribe. I'll show you how what looks like a trinket can destroy an empire built on unpaid bills and borrowed kindness. My throat tightened, breath shallow, and the laughter around me turned into a distant tide that crashed and receded from some other shore. She toyed with them as if they were a prize she'd earned, her fingers twirling the keychain with a casual cruelty. The keys jingled like laughter against the leather of her clutch, a sound that chased the color from my face. My hand went reflexively to my purse, where I kept spare house keys, only to find a hollow weight of panic. I realized in that instant I hadn't noticed them missing. The caterer's tray clinked, and someone shouted a joke. Those noises were meaningless now because the map of my future had just been folded and tucked into someone else's pocket. I left the table under the pretense of needing air, but really, I walked because I needed distance from the room that had been rearranged to exclude me. Outside, the night smelled of exhaust and cut grass, a bitter, ordinary scent that contrasted with the surreal theft inside. My fingers fumbled for my phone and I scrolled through messages until one caught my eye. A photo she'd sent earlier that week, the caption full of excitement, and in the corner of the image, barely visible, a little brass key lying on a cafe table. I hadn't noticed it then. I noticed everything now. That tiny image was a breadcrumb, and my stomach clenched at the possibility that this had been planned. not spontaneous. I thought back to the morning she moved into a new apartment last month and how she'd insisted I meet the landlord. She'd brushed off my questions about lease terms, smiled, and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it." Her "I've got it" had always been a neat dismissal, the kind that closed doors. But the key in her clutch told a different story, one in which she'd quietly transferred ownership of comfort and convenience into boxes labeled "Not for you." I felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. Everyone around me applauded a scene I no longer belonged in. When I returned to the hall, the keys were gone from her hand, but the image of them clung to my vision like a stubborn photograph. I took a seat with my palms pressed flat to the table as if holding myself together physically would stop the unraveling. My niece leaned in and said, too loudly, "Isn't it great when children finally stand on their own?" Her smile was practiced, her approval a soft blade. I nodded and felt something inside me fracture into two pieces, the part that had loved without condition, and a new, colder part that already began to count the cost of that love. Later, while the guests danced and the band played, I slipped away to the guest room where the wedding gifts were stacked like monuments to a future that didn't include me. The room smelled of paper ribbons and perfume, an intoxicating combination that made my head swim. On a small table by the window lay an envelope with my name written in a hand I recognized from a dozen polite notes over the years. Neat, confident, the same script she used in school invitations. I picked it up and my fingers trembled. The weight inside felt heavier than paper should be. Inside the envelope was a set of photocopies, a deed, a mortgage statement stamped months ago, and a bill showing a transfer of utilities scheduled for next week. My name had been crossed out on the deed and replaced with her name and an unfamiliar firm's logo. For a long time I simply stared, the paper cold against my palm, while the muffled party on the other side of the wall sounded like a life not meant for me. The photocopies were bureaucratic, impersonal, and absolute, proof that someone had been quietly redrawing the borders of my life while I celebrated my child's wedding. A mini-reveal surfaced then. The deed was notarized the same day she had asked me to babysit for a work meeting. I had left her at home that afternoon, fetching coffee, folding laundry, the small tasks of daily living that had always seemed to matter. She had used my absence like a window and stepped through it, turning my trust into a signature. Rage flared hot and ugly, but it was matched by a deep, gutting sadness. I realized how naive I had been to believe love would protect me from paperwork. I called the bank with trembling fingers, pretending to be merely curious, but the hold music felt like a countdown. The customer service woman on the other end was polite and slow. She read to me the same numbers I'd seen in photocopy. According to their records, a power of attorney form had been filed 3 weeks earlier, signed with my name, and processed by the same notary whose stamp was on the deed. My voice blurred as I asked, "Who authorized this?" And the line held answers that made my mouth go dry. Someone had used my trust to create signatures I didn't remember making. I drove to the notary's office in a fog of disbelief, the city lights blurring as I sped. The receptionist's smile was efficient. She fetched the files and slid them across the counter as if handing over receipts. The form showed my signature, eerily familiar, the slant of the M, the one I'd made for years on checks and permission slips. But the date next to it matched a day I'd spent at her bridal shower, surrounded by friends. I replayed that day in my head like a scratched record, searching for a moment where I might have loosened my grip on reality. I kept hearing her laugh in the background of memory, a sound that suddenly felt like evidence. The notary, an older woman with tired hands, looked at me with a softness that almost made me cry. "Mistakes happen," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She explained procedures in soft terms. Notarization requires ID, witnesses, a clump of bureaucracy. She offered me photocopies, and as I held them I understood the degree of planning. The IDs, the proof of residence, the careful assembly of documents. This was not a child's prank. It was a deliberate unmaking. Someone had orchestrated the removal of my name from my life with the precision of a surgeon. Back at home, where the keys once fit the lock and my shoes lined the hallway, the boxes of my life suddenly looked foreign. My books, my dishes, The framed photos seemed to belong to a room in a museum, labeled Former Owner. I walked through it like a ghost, taking measurements, feeling the hollowness of space that had once been warm with history. The image of the keys kept pulsing behind my eyes, and the photocopies burned against my skin like accusations. I understood then that a symbol, a key, had been used to broadcast ownership, and my absence in that broadcast felt like erasure. That night, I asked neighbors if anyone had seen documents delivered, or someone asking for signatures. They looked at me with polite concern and said, "We noticed a courier last week. A woman down the hall mentioned a van with a discreet logo parked outside my building on a Tuesday morning. Details slotted into place like bones in a skeleton. Courier, notary, signatures, keys. Each small fact stitched together an image of a plan that had been executed quietly, efficiently, while I was busy being a mother. I felt both violated and foolish for having been so blind. My daughter called late that evening, her voice syrupy, asking if I'd seen the decorations for the honeymoon brunch. I told her I had questions about the envelope and the deed sitting on my kitchen table, and she laughed softly, the sound of a person who believes themselves untouchable. "Oh, Mom, don't worry about paperwork," she said. "I already sorted everything. You should relax." Her words were casual, but the way she said them had the authority of a person who has already decided the outcome of a story. I realized then that she wasn't merely taking things. She was rewriting the narrative of who I was, from provider to anachronism. She'd used kindness and my willingness to trust as loopholes, turning my good nature into a document trail that excluded me. The betrayal tasted metallic in my mouth, and I understood that I had to fight not just with emotion, but with proof. The photocopies were my new ammunition, but ammunition is useless without a plan and allies. I slept very little that night, the house around me quiet, but for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant siren wailing like a question. In the small hours, I made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. I would not be erased quietly. I would take steps, legal and otherwise, to challenge what had been done. But a part of me, a small, cautious voice, whispered that every move I made could be anticipated. She had been meticulous. I had been maternal. Which was the better armor? Which would win when the stakes were everything? Morning came too quickly, coffee bitter in my mouth, and on the kitchen table another note waited. This one was typed, formal, and curt. "We have records of your authorization. Please direct any disputes to our office." No signature, no warmth. The paper sat like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. My hands shook as I picked it up and read the address. The next step would require outside help, an attorney, confrontation, perhaps even police. The thought of stepping into that arena terrified me, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt like consent. And then, just as I dialed the first number, the doorbell rang twice in quick succession, a staccato that made my heart leap. I opened the door to find a man in a dark suit, holding a legal envelope, and wearing the small professional smile of someone delivering bad news. He extended the envelope toward me, and behind him, at the corner of his car, a logo I recognized chilled my blood. The same discreet emblem from the courier the neighbor had mentioned. My name was printed on the envelope in that familiar, confident hand. He said politely, "Miss, are you the owner here?" The man's voice was calm, almost rehearsed, but his question tore straight into me. "Are you the owner here?" My lips parted, yet no sound came out. For a moment, I felt like a child being tested, my entire life balanced on a single yes or no. I forced the word yes out, though it shook. He handed me the envelope, bowed his head politely, and walked away, leaving the air thick with finality. I closed the door slowly, holding the envelope like it was a live grenade. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, each rip of paper louder than the music still echoing in my memory from the wedding. Inside was a formal notice. Property transfer finalized, new ownership recognized, effective immediately. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor. Papers spread around me like a storm of betrayal. On the last page was her name, bold, black, undeniable. My daughter. My own blood had signed me out of my home, my sanctuary, the one place I thought was untouchable. My heart raced, my chest squeezed, and I could almost hear her laughter from last night. "Don't worry, Mom. I already sorted everything." She hadn't been joking. She had been confessing. I pressed my palm to my mouth, trying to keep the sob from escaping. The room felt smaller, like the walls were inching closer. I wanted to scream, to tear the documents, but what good would that do? Paper doesn't lie. Paper kills quietly, without raising its voice. And this paper had just murdered my place in the world. Later that evening, I forced myself to return to the reception for appearances. I didn't want whispers about my sudden absence. She was still glowing, her face a perfect mask of innocence, her smile dazzling under the chandeliers. But I saw it now, the smug curve at the edges, the little spark in her eye when she glanced at me. She knew. She wanted me to know. At one point, she leaned into her groom, her voice carrying farther than she intended. "I can't wait to start a life without carrying fardos. Burdens." The word hit me like a stone. My stomach twisted, because she wasn't just speaking in generalities. She was speaking about me. And people laughed, lifting their glasses, as though cutting out your own mother was just witty small talk. I wanted to stand and shout the truth, about the deeds, the papers, the theft, but the music drowned me out. Every smile in that hall seemed complicit. Every cheer, every clap, felt like nails closing a coffin. I swallowed my rage like acid, burning me from inside, too corrosive to contain for much longer. Her groom gave me a fleeting look of discomfort, but said nothing. That silence told me everything. He was either powerless or a willing partner. Either way, I stood alone. I thought of all the nights I had fed her, clothed her, believed in her, and now she had turned my life into a stage where my humiliation was the entertainment. I excused myself again, walking outside into the cold air. The street was empty, but I could still hear faint echoes of music. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, typing messages I didn't send. Who would believe me? Who would stand by me? Family chooses sides, and in that hall, it was clear they'd already chosen hers. Back inside, I caught her speaking to an aunt. She gestured toward me, lowered her voice, then laughed. My ears burned, though I couldn't catch every word. But I knew the tone. It was the same tone children use in playgrounds when they've already decided who will be left out of the game. Except this wasn't a playground. This was my life. I tried to steady my breathing, but every glance from the guests felt heavy, loaded. Some with pity, some with curiosity, others with mockery. My cheeks burned, my throat closed. I felt like I was drowning while standing still. My own daughter had turned me into the spectacle of her wedding night. The speeches began, one after another, friends and relatives celebrating the happy couple. Then it was her turn. She raised her glass, her face glowing, and said, "To freedom, to the start of a new life, and to letting go of the things that no longer serve us." My heart stopped. Applause erupted around her. The champagne sparkled, glasses clinked, and her eyes found mine across the room. Cold, final. She didn't look away, not even as her lips curled into the faintest smile. In that instant, I knew. I wasn't just unwanted. I was being erased. My hand gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. The papers in my purse pressed against my side. A cruel reminder that her words weren't just performance. They were already fact. She wasn't speaking of what she hoped to do. She was announcing what she'd already done. And then she whispered something into her groom's ear, and he laughed. A sharp, ugly laugh that rang louder than the music. His eyes flicked toward me. My stomach dropped, because I knew then that this was no accident, no slip of cruelty. It was a plan already in motion. I froze in my chair as her groom raised his glass and, still laughing, declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Here's to life without her." The crowd erupted in uneasy laughter. My breath caught in my chest, and I realized, with cold certainty, they weren't speaking metaphorically anymore. That night, when the music finally faded and the guests drifted away, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The papers still spread across my nightstand like silent predators. My daughter's voice replayed over and over, every cruel word echoing louder than the last. She had called me a burden. She had toasted to a life without me. And the documents in my purse proved it wasn't just words. It was already happening. Sleep never came. Instead, I watched the shadows crawl across my walls, marking each passing hour. By dawn, my body was heavy, but my mind was burning. I knew the truth now. She had drawn a deadline over my life, and if I didn't act first, she would erase me completely, leaving nothing behind but debts and ashes. I sat at the kitchen table sipping bitter coffee, staring at the envelope from the lawyer. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady and mocking. This house wasn't mine anymore. Not in her eyes, not in the laws. She had stolen it, paper by paper, signature by signature, while I was too blinded by love to notice. Something hardened inside me. For years I had carried her weight, sacrificed every piece of myself to build her future. Now she wanted me gone, erased, discarded. But she had forgotten something. I still had the power to vanish on my own terms. If she thought she could inherit my world, she would inherit only ruins. I packed slowly, deliberately, filling a single suitcase with what mattered most: photographs, letters, my wedding ring, and the documents that exposed her lies. Each item felt heavy in my hands, not just with memory, but with resolve. I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving with purpose. By noon, I was at the bank. My name still lingered on accounts she didn't know about, quiet savings I had hidden for years. The clerk counted the bills, crisp and final, sliding them across the desk into my waiting hands. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was freedom disguised as paper. From there, I went to the utility companies, one after another, canceling every service that had fueled her comfort. Gas, electricity, internet. I signed the forms calmly, my hand steady, each cancellation a blade severing her control. If she wanted my world, she would step into it stripped bare. The house sale was next. I called the realtor, explained the urgency, and within hours, the paperwork was in motion. My daughter believed she had secured a future on my back. She didn't realize she had tied her life to a house that would soon no longer exist. She thought she had won, but I was about to flip the board. The final blow was the credit cards. Years ago, I had added her name to them out of love, out of trust. Now, with a few cold words over the phone, I cut that tie. "Close the account," I said, and the silence on the other end felt like thunder. When she returned from her honeymoon, the world she thought was hers would collapse like a house of cards. I walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun, my suitcase at my side, my heart strangely calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending myself into silence. I was moving with purpose, no longer the burden she wanted to erase, but the storm she had unknowingly created. Still, my chest ached. This was my daughter, the child I had raised with trembling hands and endless hope. And yet, she had turned me into prey. My love had been twisted into chains. If I stayed, she would destroy me. If I left, maybe I could destroy the illusion she had built. As the evening fell, I returned home one last time. I moved through the room slowly, my fingers brushing over the walls, the furniture, the photographs that lined the hallway. Every corner held a piece of my life, but none of it belonged to me anymore. It had already been stolen. This was just a shell now. I left the documents in the safe, but not without a twist. I placed inside them a neat folder marked with her name, proof of her hidden debts, her secret loans, all tied to my credit. When the collectors came, they would come for her. The princess mask would fall, and she would stand exposed. Locking the door behind me, I felt the cold metal in my hand one final time. The key that had once meant home now meant nothing. I dropped it into the gutter and listened to it clink against the concrete, the sound sharp and final. She wanted my house, my life, my death as her gift. Instead, I left her ashes. As I stepped into the night with my suitcase, my heart thudded with both grief and grim satisfaction. I had vanished from her story, but I hadn't left quietly. And I knew, when she returned from her honeymoon, she would find nothing but ruin where her empire was supposed to stand. And just as I turned the corner, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We know what you've done. This isn't over." The message froze me in place, glowing on the screen like a threat written in fire. "We know what you've done." This isn't over. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow, the suitcase handle slick in my palm. Who was we? My daughter? Her new husband? Or someone I hadn't even considered yet? For the first time, I realized my disappearance wouldn't be a silent act. I slipped into a cheap motel on the edge of town, neon buzzing outside the window, the room smelling faintly of cigarettes and damp carpet. My suitcase sat by the door, waiting like a silent witness. I spread the documents across the bed, staring at each page, piecing together the timeline. And there it was, hidden between the lines, her debts. Piled high, suffocating, all in my name. She hadn't built her fortune. She had built a facade, a castle of glass standing on my shoulders. Credit cards maxed, loans stacked, false signatures covering her tracks. I whispered into the empty room, "You wanted my death not out of hate, but out of fear. My existence was your evidence." The realization chilled me more than her words at the altar ever had. Every debt collector she had dodged would come knocking now. Every hidden number would be revealed. I felt a grim, bitter satisfaction rise in me. She wanted to start her new life shining, flawless, adored. Instead, the moment I stepped away, the mask would crumble, and she would stand exposed as nothing but a liar, drowning in her own lies. I gathered the documents into a folder labeled with her name, sealing it like a coffin. A part of me wanted to mail it to her directly, to watch the panic spread across her face when she opened it. But no, letting the collectors and creditors discover it would be slower, harsher. She wouldn't just fall in private, she would fall in front of everyone. The buzzing neon outside flickered, and for a second, the room dipped into darkness. I sat there, listening to the hum of traffic, and felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made. I had sold my car, my ring, my life. And for what? To raise a daughter who would bury me alive. But now she was the one standing in the grave she dug, and I held the shovel. Still, the message haunted me. Someone else knew. Someone was watching. My eyes scanned the window, the parking lot below. A shadow moved near the vending machine, and I caught myself holding my breath. Was it paranoia? Or had her plan been larger than I thought? Maybe her husband was part of it. Maybe the lawyers. Maybe even family who pretended pity. I didn't sleep that night. I sat upright on the bed, the documents clutched against my chest, listening to every creak, every car door slamming outside. My body was trembling, not with weakness, but with a strange, raw energy. I wasn't the same woman who once cried quietly at insults. I was someone else now, someone she had created with her cruelty. Morning brought no peace. I left the motel and went straight to the storage unit where I kept my late husband's old safe. The air smelled of dust and metal, and the padlock groaned as I turned the key. Inside, along with photographs and trinkets, I placed the folder of her debts, locking it away. It wasn't just protection. It was leverage, my last weapon. As I closed the safe, I felt a strange calm. I realized I didn't need to expose her myself. Life would do that. Creditors, lawyers, angry vendors, they would come for her. And she would have no one left to blame, no one left to sacrifice. I had left her with the mask of a princess, but beneath it was only ruin waiting to bleed through. I imagined her returning from her honeymoon, expecting to step into a home filled with my silence, only to find empty rooms and unpaid bills. I pictured her face when the first collector arrived at her door. The arrogance would falter, the cold smile would crack. She would taste the bitterness she had poured into me, and I wondered, almost cruelly, if she would whisper my name in fear. But I also knew something darker. She wouldn't collapse quietly. My daughter was too proud, too sharp, too dangerous. She would lash out. She would search for me. She would try to claw back what I had taken. And that message, "We know what you've done," was proof she already had her claws ready. I left the storage unit and walked aimlessly through the city streets, feeling both invisible and hunted. Crowds brushed past me, faces indifferent, lives untouched by my war. Yet every stranger's glance felt too sharp, too knowing. I wrapped my coat tighter, clutching the thought that my life now depended on how well I could disappear. By nightfall, I had decided. I wouldn't run forever. I would wait. I would watch. And when she came, when the mask slipped and the debts consumed her, I would be there, not to save her, but to see her face as the truth finally broke her. And just as that thought settled in my chest, my phone buzzed again. A new message. No name, no number, only 6 words that made my blood freeze. You won't survive the next week. The threat stayed glowing on my screen long after the motel lights dimmed. You won't survive the next week. My heart beat against my ribs like it wanted out, but a strange calmness also filled me. If she thought fear would break me, she was wrong. Fear was already gone. What replaced it was steel. I returned to the house 2 days later, not because it was mine anymore, but because I needed to see with my own eyes. The lawn was overgrown, the curtains closed, silence heavy inside the walls. I stepped across the threshold and the emptiness echoed like a scream. Furniture gone, cabinets bare, my life stripped to bones. It was her declaration carved into space. On the kitchen counter, I found piles of letters stacked carelessly. Unopened bills, court notices, creditors' demands. My name stamped on every envelope, bold, inescapable. The debt wasn't waiting for me. It had already arrived, suffocating the air. I picked one up, tore it open, and read words that chilled me. Final notice. She hadn't erased me. She had planned to bury me under paper. But here was the twist she hadn't counted on. I had already pulled myself free. By vanishing, I had turned her own trap against her. Every creditor she thought would devour me was now at her door. My lips curved into a bitter smile. The storm she brewed had found a new target. I remembered the look on her face at the altar. So sure, so untouchable. And I wondered how that same face looked now, with strangers pounding on her door, demanding payment. Did she still smile? Or had the mask cracked? The thought filled me with both sorrow and savage satisfaction. A mother's heart bleeding and hardening all at once. As I turned, I heard a noise from the living room. A voice, low and strained, followed by footsteps. My body froze. She wasn't supposed to be here yet. I stepped closer, every nerve sharp. And then I saw her. My daughter, still in her honeymoon dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks, holding a phone in her trembling hand. She didn't notice me at first. She was shouting into the receiver, her voice sharp, desperate. You said this would be taken care of. You promised no one would find out. My stomach twisted. She wasn't speaking to me. She wasn't even speaking about me. She was speaking to someone else, someone deeper in this web. My breath caught as I realized she wasn't alone in this. When she finally looked up and saw me, her eyes widened, not with relief, but with rage. "What are you doing here?" she spat, as if I were the intruder, as if this ruin was mine to explain. The venom in her voice was the same as at the altar, but now it trembled with cracks. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I stepped forward, calm, my voice low. I wanted to see what was left. My words hung in the air, and for a moment she faltered, lips quivering, before snapping back with that mask I knew too well. "Nothing is left," she hissed, "because of you." She still wanted me to carry it, the blame, the burden, but her tears betrayed her. On the table beside her lay a stack of returned checks, each one stamped insufficient funds. I lifted them, fanning them like cards, and her face turned pale. The princess mask slipped again, revealing the fraud beneath. She lunged to grab them, but I pulled back, holding them high. "Everyone will know," I whispered. Her eyes widened in panic. The walls seemed to close in around us, silence pressing like a weight. I realized she had nowhere left to hide. The house was empty, the debts towering, her allies growing distant. All she had left was me, the mother she had tried to erase. And in that moment, I wasn't her victim anymore. I was her mirror. She broke then, her voice cracking into sobs. "You don't understand. I had no choice. They threatened me." My stomach clenched. Threatened? By who? My mind spun back to the messages, the unknown number. The realization hit me cold. She wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn in something larger. But before I could press her, before I could demand names, the front door burst open. Heavy footsteps stormed in, men's voices harsh, commanding. My daughter's face drained of color as she dropped the phone. I turned, my chest tightening, and saw two men in dark suits stepping into the living room. Their eyes scanned the space, landing on me last. The taller one spoke, his voice calm but sharp as glass. "Looks like we have both of you now." His words sliced through the silence, heavy with meaning. My daughter whimpered, shrinking against the wall, while I stood frozen, my mind racing. I had thought she was the villain. Now I saw she was only one piece of a bigger trap. The mask had fallen. My daughter's cruelty was real, but so was her fear. And now, as the men stepped closer, I realized the real story wasn't just betrayal between mother and daughter. It was a game of power we had both stumbled into, and I had no idea how far the players were willing to go. One of the men reached into his coat, pulling out an envelope thicker than the rest. He tossed it onto the table between us, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You both owe more than you can pay," he said, "and the deadline has arrived." The envelope landed with a thud, sliding across the empty table, and I swear the sound cracked the silence like thunder. My daughter's breath hitched, her mascara-streaked face twisting between terror and defiance. I forced myself to sit, though my legs shook beneath me. I opened it with trembling fingers and saw not just bills, but contracts, signatures, threats written in sterile legal language. It wasn't only her debt. My name was woven through every page like a curse. I looked up at the men, my voice tighter than a fist. "This isn't mine. I didn't sign these." The taller one leaned forward, his gaze icy, and said, "It doesn't matter who signed. The world only cares whose name is on the paper." My daughter whimpered beside me, and for a second I saw her not as the monster she'd become, but as the little girl I once rocked to sleep. But that image cracked quickly, replaced by the sharp truth. She had put us both here. She exploded then, pointing at me, her voice breaking into a shrill scream. "It was her! She left me with nothing. The shorter man silenced her with a raised hand, his eyes never leaving me. "Don't waste time on blame. We need payment, and we need it now." The room spun around me. I had nothing left but the documents in my bag, the folder that held the proof of her deceit. That was my only weapon. I slid the folder onto the table, pushing it toward them. "Read it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Every loan, every lie, every account she opened under my name. It's all in here. If you want repayment, look at the real thief." My daughter gasped, lunging for the folder, but I slammed my hand down on it, pinning it in place. Our eyes met, hers wide, pleading, desperate, and for once, she was the one begging. The men exchanged a glance, the taller one finally picking up the folder and flipping through the pages. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of papers turning. My daughter shook her head wildly, tears dripping onto the floor. "No, no, she's lying. It's not true. She's trying to ruin me." Her words tumbled out, frantic but powerless. The evidence spoke louder. The taller man closed the folder with a sharp snap and stared at her. "So, this is how you played it, using your own mother like a shield." His disgust was obvious, and for the first time, my daughter shrank, her mask shattered. She dropped into the chair beside me, her body crumbling like paper in the rain. I should have felt pity, but all I felt was the raw edge of vindication. I leaned in, my voice low, each word sharp. "You called me a burden. You toasted to my death, and yet here we are. Your lies are what's killing you, not me." Her mouth opened, but no words came, just silence, just shame. For years I had begged for her gratitude. Now, all I wanted was the truth to crush her arrogance. The shorter man finally spoke, his tone clipped. "This changes things. We don't deal with ghosts. We deal with the living. And right now, all I see is one woman willing to pay with honesty, and another hiding behind lies." He tossed the folder back onto the table, its weight slamming against the wood. My daughter flinched, curling into herself. For a flicker of a moment, I saw the little girl again, the child who used to cry when storms rattled the windows, who clung to me until sleep returned. My heart ached, but I forced the image away. That child was gone. In her place sat a woman who had carved my love into debt, who had wished for my death to free herself. I couldn't let nostalgia blind me again. Her voice cracked finally, small and broken. Please, please don't leave me like this. The men's eyes flicked between us, waiting. I turned my gaze on her, steady and cold. You already left me years ago. This is what's left. The words tasted like ash on my tongue, but they were the truest I had ever spoken. She lowered her head, sobbing quietly, the sound like a confession. The taller man pushed the folder back to me. We'll review this. But know this. Both of your names are tied together. If she burns, you burn too. Choose wisely. His words struck deep, and for a moment, fear coiled inside me again. Could I truly separate myself from her sins? Or was I destined to carry them to the grave? I gripped the folder tight, pressing it against my chest. Then I'll fight. I won't be erased quietly. If she wants my death as her gift, she'll have to earn it. My voice surprised even me, sharp and final. My daughter looked up, her face streaked with tears, and whispered, "You can't do this to me." But I already had. The men gathered their things, their presence heavy, but leaving behind a strange silence once they walked out the door. I stayed seated, my body trembling, my mind racing. My daughter reached for me, but I pulled away. My heart a locked door she no longer had a key for. She stared at me with hollow eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. I stood, slipping the folder back into my bag. "The truth is coming for you," I told her, my voice steady, "and this time I won't stand in its way." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked like a ghost of herself, pale, shaking, exposed. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't the only one who had been unmasked. I had too. I walked toward the door, my hand on the knob, when I heard her whisper behind me. So faint I almost didn't catch it. "If you leave, I'll make sure you never walk away again." The words slithered into the room like poison. I froze, the weight of the threat sinking in. She hadn't surrendered. Not yet. My hand tightened on the knob, my breath sharp in my throat. I turned my head just enough to see her reflection in the darkened window, her eyes no longer weeping, but burning with something far darker. I understood then. She would rather destroy us both than lose. And with that, I stepped outside, the door closing behind me like the end of a chapter. But her threat clung to me, louder than the night air. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The night air felt sharp as knives against my skin when I stepped outside. My chest heaved, not from running, but from the weight of her words echoing in my skull. "I'll make sure you never walk away again." I had thought the confrontation would end it, that exposing her would free me. But the threat made it clear. She wasn't done. Not with me. Not with revenge. I walked with no destination, only the pounding rhythm of my footsteps to drown out the storm in my head. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement, as if even the city wanted to remind me of how close darkness followed. The folder pressed against my ribs inside my bag, both my shield and my curse. Every page was a truth that could destroy her. Every page was also a rope, tying me to her downfall. At dawn, I found myself on a bench near the train station, the cold seeping through my coat. Strangers moved around me, dragging luggage, sipping coffee, their lives untouched by the weight I carried. I envied them. People with destinations, plans, smiles. I had none of those. All I had was survival, and the realization that even family can become your executioner. But as the sun rose, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had lived for her, selling, working, giving, until there was nothing left of me but scraps. And still, she wanted more. Still, she wanted my death as her final gift. Yet here I was, breathing, standing, watching a new day unfold. That was something she couldn't take. That was mine. I checked my phone. No new threats, no calls, no messages, just silence. And in that silence, I found clarity. I didn't need to fight her anymore. Not directly. The world itself would dismantle her illusions. Creditors, lawyers, broken trust. Every mask she wore would be ripped away by the consequences she thought she had escaped. My job was only to step aside and let it happen. Still, a part of me ached. A part of me still saw the little girl with flour on her cheeks, laughing in the kitchen, clinging to my leg when storms shook the windows. Love doesn't vanish, even when it turns poisonous. It lingers, like a scar, reminding you of what once was, and that was the cruelest truth of all. I still loved her, even as I walked away. I rented a small apartment in another town. Bare walls, cheap furniture, the faint smell of paint and dust. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could forge my name here. The quiet was both eerie and healing. For the first time, I felt the possibility of peace humming through the cracks. Days passed. Word spread quickly. Whispers in family circles. Neighbors, old friends. She lost everything, they said. She's drowning in debt. The humiliation she once reserved for me was now hers, painted across her reputation. Vendors demanded payment. Collectors knocked at her door. Guests from the wedding whispered about betrayal, and she had no one to hide behind. I thought it would bring me joy, but what I felt was something else. Not triumph, not glee, just release. I no longer needed her validation, her love, her approval. I had wasted years waiting for it, breaking myself to earn it. But the truth was simple. Some children are not blessings. Some are lessons. And my lesson was survival. One evening, as I sipped tea by the window, the phone rang. The screen showed her name. My hand hovered, trembling. Did I answer? Did I listen to the excuses, the rage, the manipulation? Or did I let silence be my final word? With a deep breath, I pressed decline. The phone went still. The choice was mine. Finally, mine. I began writing letters to myself, small notes folded into a journal. Not for her, not for anyone else. For me. Reminders that I mattered, that my existence was not defined by her cruelty. I wrote about the scent of lilacs in spring, the taste of fresh bread, the warmth of sunlight on my face. Small things, ordinary things, but they belonged to me. Sometimes, late at night, the grief would return. I would remember her as a child, her small hand gripping mine. Tears would sting, but I let them fall, because grief was proof that I had loved. And I refused to be ashamed of that. Even betrayal cannot erase love. It only teaches you where to place it next time. Weeks turned into months, and slowly I rebuilt. I found work, modest but steady. I made friends, people who knew nothing of my past, and saw me as more than a name on a cursed deed. And with each day, the shadows of her threat faded. She had wanted me gone. Instead, I had found life. Today, I sit here, in this small apartment, sunlight spilling through the curtains. My heart still aches, but it beats steady, stronger. I live not for her anymore, not for what she demanded or expected. I live for me, and that is my final gift, not to her, but to myself. What would you have done differently, standing in my place? Would you have stayed silent or walked away? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your voice. And if this story left you breathless, like it did me, like this video and subscribe, because what happened next in my life was even more unbelievable.